Welcome to Female Frequency Podcast. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Nelson, curator, artist, mentor, divine channel, and host of Female Frequency. I am here to bring you unbound forms of ecofeminism, reclaiming art, spirituality, and feminine power to revive the earth. Each week, Female Frequency brings you intimate conversations with trailblazers and amazing stories to ignite change. You'll find inspiring alternatives to the patriarchy, discover creative paths, courage, connection, and magic. Hear from the heroes who activate and restore the divine feminine for our earth. Each episode serves as a catalyst, offering wisdom along with practical steps to empower you to make a positive impact on the planet. Whether you're an artist, empath, or eco-warrior, there's a story here to invite awe and help you embody what I call the female frequency. As we approach Earth Day, I have a very special guest to help us with different paths from the patriarchy. Get ready to explore your inner forest as we dive deep with Osprey Orielle Lake, international activist, change maker, and author of the book, The Story in Our Bones, How Worldviews and Climate Justice Can Remake a World in Crisis. Now, an absolute game changer in the canon of ecofeminism, Osprey draws on her decades of experience as founder and director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network to bring forth embodied solutions and stories that we need to hear now more than ever. Osprey reminds us that within our bones is a place of world making, of creativity, regenerative energy, and healing forces from the atomic to the cellular views. Inside this episode, we talk about expansive knowledge systems that restore our kinship to our earth lineage, the awe within our bodies, and how this can influence our policies, social structures, and daily choices. So really, call your book clubs, activate the reader's guide, and join us as we get on Mother Earth's frequency and summon a new paradigm. Hello, sister. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk about your book. I love how it incorporates personal stories and facts to inspire action. But I got to tell you, as I was reading it, I kind of used it like a tarot deck, if you will. I just opened it and was like, what is calling me to read, or what am I being called to read first? And there I was. I was in chapter Girl Rising. And you know where I was? I was right in the part where you were sharing your story about being in Oaxaca, receiving a statue. And my heart just exploded because the Venus of Willendorf has been my talisman for years. It always allows me to think bigger, to ask more inquisitive questions. So can you tell us a little bit more and tell the audience more about your age when you were receiving this statue and a little bit more, like more of the story behind that?
That's so, well, first of all, it's such an honor to be here on your podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it very much. And I wanted to tell that story because it leads into the whole chapter about our understanding of the feminine principle, both the beauty and sacredness and power, but also what has happened along the way to really separate us from a lot of those stories and ancestries. So, but I wanted to start with that example because it happened at such an embodied level as a child when I didn't have words to describe what I was thinking or feeling. So the chapter starts with the fact that when I was 8 years old, my family went to Oaxaca. My father was called to work there, and I was with my sister and my mother and my father. And one day we had gone to the market, and it was a very hot day. And all of this, I mean, I'm 8 years old, taking in the beauty of the land and a different language, a different culture, and the smells and the vibration and all of it, just so different and beautiful. It really touched me. I mean, it was just more something at a body sensation, a feeling sensation, rather than an intellectual sensation at 8. But there was one point where we were at the market and my sister and my mother were getting some food. And of course I was with them, but I kind of wandered off to one of the stalls in the open market where I had seen all these colorful ribbons, and it had just pulled me in, like these gorgeous ribbons of every color imaginable. And I went over there and I just had closed my eyes, and the ribbons were, soft on my skin in the breeze. And I opened my eyes, and there was this beautiful woman dressed in her traditional attire, someone of grandmother age. And she was looking at me with this beautiful smile. Just, I can imagine now as an older person, her looking at this child, just kind of taking in these ribbons and the color and the sensation and the wind. And she picked my hand up, and she took this little statuette, a clay statuette. And this was in Oaxaca, so they have a special clay there. It's a black clay, very beautiful, that they've used for generations. And it was a little statuette of, what I call a goddess. I didn't know at the time, but it's a female figure. And in one hand, she's holding a stalk of corn, and in the other hand, the moon. And she, it's about this big. I still have it. About this big. And
so it's like 4 inches, just for some of us listening.
Maybe at the most, maybe more like 2.5 inches, I would say. About 2.5 inches, I don't know. And she placed it in my palm of my hand, and, it was clearly a gift. And, I was a kid. I don't even remember what I said or did. All I remember is her, and it be placed in my hand. I don't really have any other clear memory, but, that I remember.
I mean, come on, this is such a special gift.
It's so beautiful. And so I mentioned it because, at one point for me in as a child, it was like, oh, I've been given the gift, a present, a toy. This is where my mind went. And then, over the years, of course, I just kept it with my stuff, keep our special stuff. And then I remember looking at it, even as a child, and then growing with it over the years and realizing this is not a toy. This is something very powerful. And it was nothing like I'd ever seen as a kid growing up,
Yes.
United States of America. It was like, oh, there's corn and the moon and the ancientness of the looking of the figure. Of course, it was a modern thing. It wasn't like an antique or something. It was, a modern statuette, but based on ancient imagery, and ancient symbology and the different things that are in there. And so it really influenced me to start questioning, like it brought forward this question of what was I not sensing in my own culture that I was sensing was in this little statuette of being connected to the land and the women and the moon and the women and growing seeds and corn and the earth. And it just began that question.
Absolutely. I love it because, first of all, I study art. I'm an art curator, and there's not a lot of female iconography to be found all in these different cultures. And so to have that gift at such a young age, to have that female figure plus earth qualities with the moon and the corn, I just was like, you were meant to open our eyes for a few things.
Yeah. And I think also, to your point, it's so interesting. I didn't mention it in this book, but I'd written an earlier book about over a decade ago when I was very involved with my art career. And so I didn't know it would sort of surface in this conversation, but I really appreciate you pointing out the need for female images and images of the Mother Earth, and us bringing back the story of Mother Earth in her many, many forms, in her many, many names all over the world, and bringing back that imagery so we remember the living earth, or we remember our connection, and I remember our reflections on the goddess and our connection as women and men and women to the sacred feminine principle. And so I really resonate with you saying that, because in my art career, I focused on doing bronze sculpture for many, many years. And all of the images were around, images of, the river as the feminine principle of the river, or the trees. And so I was very engaged with how we bring forward this feminine principle in different forms of nature. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
Absolutely. Thank you. I mean, for me to enter your book like that and then to see how that possibly influenced you just because you had a form plus female principles and forms of different energies to be able to bring this particular book into manifestation. I can't wait to dive into your book with everyone. So do you think, can you give us a point where you were asking the sculpture or asking some of the questions as you grew up with this sculpture, how that influenced this book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm really getting at, to mention sort of the subtitle of the book, it's The Story is in Our Bones. And then the subtitles is How Worldviews and Climate Justice Can Remake a World in Crisis. And in this part of the book, I'm kind of going into this deep dive on unpacking the patriarchy in essence. And I really have observed in the work that I do at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, which is also, as you know, a big focus in the book about how we work with women all over the world for climate justice and climate solutions. And unfortunately, because of gender inequality, how women are impacted first and worst by environmental degradation and the growing climate crisis, but also how they're key to solutions and how lifting up women's leadership is essential to the solutions that we need right now. And their leadership in every arena, from political work to reforestation, to protecting old growth forests, to growing food, to policy levels at the climate talks that we have annually at the United Nations. I mean, we need women in this space. I could not emphasize this enough, because we've had this gender inequality, we've been missing their voices, and it's harmed all of us, men and women and gender diverse people and the earth, everybody and everything. So in this chapter, I'm really looking at, well, how do we look at the root causes, and how do we look at historically we got into this condition of the patriarchy and this imbalance and not living in egalitarian societies where everyone in the earth is respected and acknowledged. And so for me, looking at this little goddess figurine has been, one of the ways in which I've looked towards the past for keys and answers and root causes, because I think when we realize that at one time, we all were indigenous to one place, it's a way to help us decolonize if we're not indigenous peoples in a current context, and how we can also then learn from our own, what I like to say, pre-patriarchal and pre-colonized times, which is where these goddesses come from, and how they can reconnect us with the feminine principle, but also with the land and ourselves and our personal power and our dreams and our visions, and how we need to regenerate these different aspects. And so, yeah, that's the journey of this particular part of the book, is how, we need to tease out the understanding of patriarchy and how it connects to colonization, racism, and capitalism, meaning this extractive economy where we no longer see the earth as this living relative, but something we can take from and extract from. But if we were remembering that we're relatives with the forests and the mountains and the waters and trees, then we would not be in this place where we're not respecting the natural laws or the planetary boundaries.
Yes, because we're all biological beings. We're beings. If we could all notice those times when we need to be more supportive with someone else or help lift them up in a different way. And my favorite part of the book, besides the story of you receiving the gift, is that you just straight up ask women, how can you help defend the earth? And I want to share that I have asked several of my friends, how can we help Osprey do this? How can we help each other do this? We are on your movement.
Well, I'm deeply honored to hear you say that. Of course, it delights me, and I appreciate you sharing that. And yes, I feel that we are in an all hands on deck moment. Mother Earth has made it perfectly clear in her language of droughts and tornadoes and torrential rains and forest fires and, floods that, are decimating communities and killing people. And the earth is erupting to balance herself. She's trying to balance herself. And, we have an opportunity, as scientists tell us, it's not too late to avert the worst impacts of environmental degradation and the climate crisis. Like, all of us acting together can have such a huge influence. And I've seen that over and over again in these women networks we work with globally, the role women are playing. And if you don't mind, maybe I could just share one quick story. So maybe it's not so abstract. What just came to mind is we have the honor of working with these amazing women in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we work with our weekend coordinator there, Nima Namadamu. And over the course of 8 years now, we've been reforesting this region called the Atombe region, which was devastated through slash and burn deforestation. And 8 years later, we've planted hundreds of thousands of trees with women just doing nurseries. There's no huge technical equipment. It's all done by hand. There's no roads. And 8 years later, we have created a context in which 25% of the trees are for human use and 75% of the trees are rewilding this forest. And it's really happening. And we're learning to be life-enhancing species and life-enhancing humans, because as we're planting these trees, the entire biome and ecosystem is changing, and the rains are coming back because of the trees that we planted. And now the natural forest is regenerating itself. And it's so uplifting to see, if we just step in there, the regeneration of the land can come. And because some of the trees that we've planted are for human use, we're now protecting 1.6 million acres of old growth forests, because now the local communities don't need to use that wood anymore. Now we can protect, this natural old growth forest. And so these are just some examples, like women working, protecting the land, defending old growth forest, regenerating, food systems and forests. And there's so much we can do when we're all engaged together.
Love it. I love everything about that. And it's such a community science way to engage with a project like that. All the species. That's amazing. I'm looking forward to learning more about that and keeping in touch with you about that. As we go into diving deeper into your book, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to the title, The Story is in Our Bones? Because I have a saying, the story is in the ice, that I learned from watching Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, so many years ago. So when I saw The Story is in Our Bones, there was a light bulb that clicked, because another friend of mine, Jody Sperling, was on a climate research mission. And the scientists had showed her the similarities between ice structure and human bone structure, and they were so similar. So when I got into your book, I was just devouring it. So what was your inspiration with the title?
Thank you for that question. So the stories in our bones is kind of a multifaceted meaning to it. And one aspect is how we are nature. We are part and particle of nature, and we need to remember that. I think in our modern context, there's often a sense of orphanage from our living earth because of the worldviews of our dominant society and modernity. There can be that sense, which is not real, but a true sense that we're separate from the land. And I think that's been very harmful to us personally, but also as a society and how we treat the earth and one another. And so I'm going back into our DNA, back into our bones, and remembering that, without being esoteric, we are literally coming from the stars. Our structure and our elements come from the stars, that we are part of the living cosmology. We're part of the web of life. We evolve from our tree and plant and animal ancestors. And how do we remember that on a daily basis? That story is in our bodies. We embody the fact that we're part and particle of nature. So part of it is remembering ourselves in the earth lineage, and really how that kind of influence policy, our politics, our daily life, our social structures, and how that can influence our worldviews, to just simply remember that we are nature. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is just very much at a scientific level. Our bones are a place where, we every day, gazillions of new blood cells are created in our bones. We're generating life out of our bones. And some of our DNA is kept in our bones, and how literally it's a place of world making and creativity. And so this is the moment that we're in, of connecting with the earth. Remember, we are people who can be world making, and we can change how we're living here with each other and the earth, and take on these systems of oppression that we're talking about, of colonization and racism and patriarchy and capitalism and all these big isms, but they're the things that we're struggling with. But how can we remember who we are and what our ethics and true values are? And so this is sort of the meaning behind the stories in our bones. Look within, and then we can act from that place of knowledge and well-being.
Very eloquent. Thank you for sharing such an intimate view into your book, because it is a creative process. And as we keep going deeper and deeper into your book, I mean, you start out with taking us on a journey through what you call mapping, and you're starting out in the cosmos. Can you take us on a ride?
Sure. I was trying to really think about, how do I get into this conversation about worldviews, because it's such a vast topic and has nuances depending, where you're from geographically, or your historical background, or your ethnicity, or, your ideology, what sexuality you maintain. I mean, worldview is a vast topic. So one thing that I wanted to get to right away is that part of the conundrum we're in right now is, as I mentioned earlier, this orphanage from a living earth. And so I'm looking at cosmology, and how do we get back in touch with an animate cosmology, a living earth? And so I start the book by taking us into origin stories. What are our origin stories? And going back even to looking at the science, because many times in our youth, we get classes, around the fact of, the birth of the earth and the stars and the solar system, but it can remain sort of in this academic part of our brain. And then we never talk about it again. This sort of incredible, amazing awe, wonder of the fact that we're even on this living planet spinning in space, which we should be thinking about a heck of a lot more, as far as I'm concerned, and appreciating that more. And if we did do that, how would that influence how we live ecologically and socially and economically to really respect the web of life? And so I go back into origin stories, and where did they come from, and how they affect our worldview and our meaning making in the world and world making. And so this is why I started out with, the birth of the stars and how they lead to the evolution on the planet Earth, and to eventually the evolution of humans, to really appreciate the journey we've been on. And the big question is, how did we get here in this incredible miracle of life? And what are we doing with it, which is so horrifically destructive and violent? It's shocking, and for me, filled with grief and alarm that this is what we're doing right now. And we need to change that trajectory.
Yeah, I almost even want to dissect everything that you just said, because it was so dense. First of all, humans, it's a miracle that we're here. We had to go through a lot just to get here, just in the making of us. And then plus our community with our plants and flora and fauna and our ocean friends, it takes a lot for everybody to be here.
It really does. And, it's something that boggles the mind. I think if you really take in the beauty and awe of it, I think it would crush us, because it's just so phenomenal, that we dream at night, that we have all these different emotions, just the fact of being a human being. And to throw that away, to be a destructive force versus beauty making and healing and life enhancing and generating more life and doing what the rest of nature is doing. I mean, nature is constantly creating conditions for life, as those in the biomimicry world like to say. Nature is constantly regenerating conditions for life to thrive. And I want us to be a part of that we are keystone species, that we are here to generate better conditions. And I also like to think about a lot of Indigenous peoples. I think it's really important at this time, as we've lost our way in the dominant culture, to really look at the role and sacredness and knowledge and wisdom of Indigenous peoples. 80% of the biodiversity left on Earth, the rivers, the forests, the mountains, is in the lands and hands of Indigenous peoples who are stewarding that last 80%. And I think part of the discussion is also really honoring Indigenous peoples and their science, and the Indigenous scientists, and looking at their worldview and sitting at the feet and learning from Indigenous people who have maintained that wisdom of how to live within the planetary boundaries and to respect living in a harmonious way, in a reciprocal way with the land. And so I think that's part of the discussion as well.
Reciprocal. I think that that's fast becoming my new favorite word. Yes, because it is so scientific, and they have, I think, the Indigenous have a greater vocabulary and vernacular of when they are communicating about themselves with Earth and the natural laws so they can be more harmonious. And these feminine principles encompasses that, I think, the river and the flow and the creativity and being more receptive and really taking in that your emotions are facts. They are evidence of what's happening too. It's not just because it's your internal system, because we're biological beings. We don't always have to be in production mode like the patriarchal system has put upon the earth at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that I like what you're saying, that I referred different times in the book to other ways of knowing, that it's really important that we bring ourselves at this really critical, crucial time for the human species. This experiment may not go on. We'll have to see how we behave. And if we start listening to the natural laws of the earth and listening to, how to be here as healthy, life-enhancing species participants. But I think it involves, being really well educated scientifically, but also inviting other ways of knowing, whether that's our intuition, listening to the land, listening to our dreams, and bringing our full selves to the table emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I think this makes a huge difference. And I know, not to sound so esoteric, but, I really think that also, at WeCan, we do very practical work, like sharing the forest protection reforestation program in the DR Congo. I mean, we also go to the UN climate talks and advocate there for, gender responsive climate policies and just transition programs and keeping fossil fuels in the ground. And we fight, fossil fuel projects, and we have all these different programs. But, where are we coming from when we do this work?
Yes. Yes.
How do we approach these things in a way that's very technical and intellectual, many times legally, but also how to bring our emotions and our spirit with us, because that's what's going to also help change the way we talk about these things. And just to give one example is, we're always talking about resources. And so that immediately is in the language, like a mercantile language or a language that commodifies nature and brings us into capitalism. Like when we talk about a forest as a resource or a river as a resource or the ocean as a resource, then we're instantly reducing it to something that's not a part of the web of life, but part of something that humans have dominion over for our use. And so even just saying, let's name the river, the Wanganui River, the Amazon River, the Mississippi River, then it becomes this living being, an entity in a living cosmology, an animate cosmology, an animate earth. And we see ourselves seeing, these rivers, these mountains, these forests as our relatives, our living relative. And then we see the earth differently. But when we say resources, it immediately creates that distance and capitalism and an extractive economy, because all of those types of words change our relationship to the web of life. So I think part of the discussion is other ways of knowing, different usages of languages, different types of thinking that are part of the discussion as well.
Mm-hmm. Did your book come with an abstract on some of that language to help with other groups that have book clubs? It's like, if not, okay.
It's a great question. I have, the book is available and in all the normal book places. And then I have a website for my organization, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, but then I have another website that's just for the book. And on that website for the book, there's a reader's guide, a detailed reader's guide with going into questions and other, different ways for people to get other information from other authors. And so, and mappings and all kinds of things. So that's available.
Okay, wonderful. I'll make sure to put that in the show description and get that in the show notes, because I can already see a couple places where I need to do that with some folks. That sounds really, really great. I've so much enjoyed our time together here. Thank you so much for being you and being creative and helping us be more in togetherness with the natural laws, being more in community, and just straight up asking women, how can we defend Mother Earth? I'm here for it.
I love that you arrived at that question and pulled that from the book. That deeply honors me and makes me so happy. And thank you so much for sharing this time with me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I started this podcast because the world is out of balance. The feminine is in a deficit. That's not only affecting women, it's affecting the planet herself. So I'm carrying the torch with you, sister.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Until we meet again. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for vibing with the female frequency today. If this episode or any other episode has helped transform or shift your perspective in any way, please tell me all about it. Tell me all about it in a review where you are listening to this podcast. It will totally help me out and help spread the vibe. If you're a creative looking for more support, this is what I do for a profession. I often host workshops, and you can find out all about those on my website. So take a look at www.pressreign.com. That's PRESSREIGN.com. All right, y'all, until next time.